while I waited for people to be up.
It's got this weird light thing going on.
Yeah, I know. It's
It's just these overhead lights. Let's try it now. It's a little better. I'll move this last one. Excuse.
you can also just move over here, I think, a little bit, and that's better.
Yeah. This light.
She's wanting to make it really dark and
Perfect. Now that light's in my eye.
It's really just no escaping it.
Yeah. Cool.
So I would just go ahead and go ahead and there are 3 people on, so I would go ahead and say, hey everybody, and just go ahead and
Just go
start
for
it.
it. Alrighty. So it looks like there are 3 people on right now. So I'll just go ahead and start the tasting. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Colin Lee. I'm one of the sommeliers here at the Exchange at Edmonds Oost. Yeah, just a little bit about me. I'm from here in Charleston. I'm one of the few natives still living in the city. I got into wine a few years ago, working at a local country club, and then kind of caught the wine bug, as they say. Today I'm just gonna wait for a few more people to join, and then we'll just go ahead and dive into the tasting. I think a good bit of y'all have actually been doing the blind tasting series with us throughout the last couple of weeks. So today's, it's going to kind of go in a similar structure as the last few Sarah has done. So hi, Kelly. It's good to hear from you as well. I hope you all are doing great. Yeah, I'm really, really excited for this tasting. Kelly joined us for our Somm 2.0 series that I had the pleasure of teaching before all of this craziness started. So this is kind of bringing back good memories for me. Yeah. So hi to you as well, Kelly. Yeah, this is going to be a fun tasting today. I'm just going to wait for a few more people to join in, and then we'll just go ahead and start the tasting. We're glad you're here, Kelly. Yeah. The one bad thing about having a wine bar in Charleston is that flies will obviously be attracted to your wonderful glasses of wine. So forgive me for trying to swat them away today. But all right. Well, we'll just go ahead and jump into it. Today, again, we're going to be tasting 2 red wines blind. The sort of way I like to structure the blind tasting is almost kind of like a classroom setting. So we'll go through what I like to call the 4 parts of a blind tasting evaluation. And then we'll dive into some conclusions and talk about the wines a little bit as well. So first things first, when we're blind tasting wine, or tasting wine in general, the first thing we're going to do is look at the wine in front of us. I know it is really tempting to just go ahead and jump into the glass, but we, especially with red wine, when we're tasting it, especially blind, we can actually gather a lot of information just by looking at the wine in the glass. Red wine is made by actually macerating or soaking the grapes on their skins. So when we do that, we extract a ton of color, flavor, and this wonderful, wonderful, wonderful little chemical compound known as tannin that we'll get into once we get to the tasting portion of this class. We extract, we soak this juice, and it gets this brilliant, brilliant red color. So grape varieties are extremely varied all throughout the world. So we can actually tell a lot, especially with red wine, just about the grape's physiological character just by simply looking at it. Let's go ahead and pick up our wine number 1 and our wine number 2, and then let's hold them over that tasting sheet. This will also act as our sort of guide for today. I know it's flipped on my screen because I'm using the computer's camera, but let's use this as kind of our guide for class today. It's also really, really useful when looking at and evaluating the color of wine. So yeah, let's take those 2 glasses of wine. Let's just hold them over that sheet of paper in a 45-degree angle and look straight down at them. And what do we notice about the color difference between them? Can anybody kind of just start throwing out some colors? And when I like to look at wine, I look straight down at the core and then start to look out towards the rim. The core, it can tell you a lot. Let's talk about wine 1, for example. Wine 1, what's the kind of color of wine 1? Yeah, I mean, wine 1's got this. Yeah, Kelly, definitely. Wine number 2's definitely got this like purplish color to it compared to wine number 1. Wine number 1 almost has this like brilliant, almost like ruby-ish. It's got a little bit of what's known as rim variation to it as well. So there's a lot of varied color there. The core is this really brilliant ruby color, but it also starts to fade out almost to like an orangish, rustish color to it. So that actually will indicate a few different things. One thing that could indicate is age. So maybe wine number 1 has a little bit of age to it, a little bit of bottle age. As a wine ages, it starts to, especially for red wine, it starts to fade in color. It starts to turn almost to like a brownish, tawnyish. Think of like port, the color of port, like a really, really rich tawny port. It almost has this like deep brown color. That's because oxygen allows the wine just to kind of develop its color palette a little bit further. Hi, Stephanie. Good to see you as well. Thank you for joining. Wine number 1 maybe has a little bit of bottle age to it, or has maybe been aged in barrel for a good bit of time. Those are definitely 2 things we can get from that color. But yeah, great note there, Kelly. Wine number 2 definitely has some purple color to it. One thing that purplish color will indicate, one, is youthful character. Youthful wines tend to have these more brilliant, bright, intense colors to them. It also will indicate maybe a thickness to the skins as well. So as I was saying before, grape varieties have different physiological variances between them. So some of these grape varieties have very thin skins, where some of these grape varieties have very thick skins. Very famous thin skin varieties. These thin skin varieties will give you almost a lighter, kind of pale, transparent color to them. They'll just be a little less intense than something that's got some really, really thick skins. Thick skin grape varieties will give you this deep, dark, rich, intense color. So some really famous thin skin varieties: Pinot Noir, Gamay, a few other ones that we can throw out there. Tempranillo, as we saw in our last tasting, can sometimes be a little more transparent than something like a thicker skin variety, which Syrah famously has these really, really dark, rich colors to it. Also, the Cabernet family, so Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Cab Franc, all have these deep, dark, rich colors to them. So yeah, that's definitely something we should take note of. Yeah, so would you say wine number 2, wine number 1 versus wine number 2? Wine number 1, is it more of a kind of thinner skin variety, a lighter colored wine, or is it more kind of deep, dark, rich color to it? No, it's okay. Yeah. Yeah, I would say wine number one definitely is a little lighter in color than wine number two. Wine number two has this really, really kind of almost deep core to it. It's like Kelly was saying, it's almost got this kind of purplish color to it. I would almost call that like it's purple. I would almost say that's like maybe a garnet-ish as well. It's definitely got some color to it. So maybe wine number two is a thicker skin variety versus whereas wine number one might be a little thinner. All right. The last thing we're gonna just go over in terms of sight is the tears in the wine. So tears, or as they're known as legs, really don't tell you too much about the wine other than that the potential alcohol. This is something we shouldn't pay too much attention to, as I mean, the glass you're actually using can be really affected by what you're washing it with. So sometimes it can kind of mess with the evaluations in terms of the tiers, or if you want to use a really fancy science term to impress your friends, viscosity. All viscosity means is the way liquid moves within itself, and what this will tell you is just the kind of potential alcohol level. But I mean, the difference between wine number one and two is actually pretty vast in terms of tiers. I mean, wine number one, I mean, those are some pretty slow, thick-moving tiers. So what that kind of indicates is maybe wine number one has a higher potential alcohol, whereas wine number two, it's almost just like sheeting, just very, very light. So really, when we start to think about alcohol in a wine, we're really trying to figure out what region it may come from. Higher alcohol wines generally come from warmer climates, whereas lower alcohol wines come from a climate that's a little cooler. So somewhere that might be really warm, like Napa Valley is a good example of these really intense high alcohol wines. Australia is another example of a type of wine that can, really get up there in alcohol. And I'm talking like 14.5 to 15% alcohol, even higher in some cases, like with your big Zens. I mean, it's not unheard of for those Zinfandels to get up there and like 15.5, 16% alcohol, which is pretty crazy. Whereas something like maybe wine number two, I mean, it doesn't seem to, I mean, just by looking at it, doesn't seem to have really, really intense high alcohol. So maybe that's coming from a cooler climate. Alrighty, let's just go ahead and jump into the what we call the smell or the nose of the wine. This is one of my favorite parts. And the first thing we're gonna try and gauge is whether the wine is flawed or not. So one of the most famous flaws in a wine is something known as cork taint, or TCA. This is what people are talking about when they talk about a corked wine. That will almost smell like a wet piece of cardboard, or your grandma's attic is a really kind of signifier for that. I mean, for me, TCA just really, or cork taint, really just smells like mold. It just smells really unpleasant. So since we did not pour these wines for you or taste them before we sold them to you, let's just go ahead and make sure they are clean, as we say. So let's give wine number one and wine number two a quick sniff, and then we'll just go ahead and start smelling wine number one. Delicious. Delicious. Alrighty, yeah, everybody, just also that first initial smell just helps kind of like engage our nose for the tasting. So anyone out there, just let me know if you think the wine may be flawed or corked. If so, please bring that back, and we will exchange that bottle for you free of charge. So because we can't have y'all drinking corked wine. That's just not good. Alrighty. So it looks like everybody is all good. Let's start with wine number one. So the first thing we're gonna really look for is the aromatic intensity of the wine. So let's just go ahead and start smelling wine number one. What are we really getting on the nose here? Awesome, Kelly. I'm glad to hear that there's no flaws there. What are we getting on the nose for wine number one? I mean, there's this immediate just like ripeness that jumps out of the glass for me. There's almost like a slight burning sensation as well. Whenever you get that, again, this is almost a good giveaway for a potential for a little bit of alcohol to be there as well. I get like a ton of these like really, really ripe fruit. I get some red cherry in there. I get a lot of this almost like ripe blackberry jam. A little bit of blue fruit in there as well. So when we start to see that a little bit, that can almost start leading us in the direction of a wine that's probably seen some sunlight. Something that's been, I smell some floral too as well, Stephanie. That's a brilliant depiction of that wine. Yeah, burning sensation. Yeah, it almost like singes the nose hairs a little bit. But yeah, I mean, I smell just this so much fruit. It's almost like a fruit basket. There's so many different kinds of fruits there. So what that tells me is that this wine has definitely seen a little sunlight, comes from maybe a warmer region, and then also that when the wine was picked, maybe there was some ripe berries in there, some dried berries in there, and maybe even a little like underripe berries in there. Because I do get a little bit of like almost like a light red cherry in there too. It's delicious. But yeah, I get a lot of floral notes too. A lot of floral. There's some spiciness to this as well. I get a little bit of this like nice cracked black pepper, and then just a touch of earthiness. Now, the main thing when we're smelling the wine and trying to kind of decide where this wine may come from is this really nice balance between fruit and earth. Usually, if a wine smells and tastes fruity, like really, really fruity, it's coming from a New World location. Whereas if something smells a little earthy, maybe a little less ripe, maybe a little more sour, it's probably coming from the Old World, i.e. Europe. New World is pretty much everywhere else in the wine world but Europe. And when we're smelling, what I like to focus on is the fruits versus the non-fruit characters. So a good non-fruit characters, like Stephanie was mentioning, some floral notes. That's a really good non-fruit descriptor. Sometimes you'll get some vegetal notes as well, some herbs, spices, potting soil, this really nice kind of earth smell as well. Also, one of the most important non-fruit characteristics you can pick up on is oak. Oak will almost smell like baking spices. Think of these sweeter spices, vanilla, cinnamon, clove. That will almost always indicate that the wine has been aged in a new oak barrel. So are we getting any of those kind of oak smells on wine number one? Maybe not like some super new barrels used here, but maybe some older, maybe some larger barrels. But for me, this wine just immediately comes across as a kind of fruitier wine. Alrighty, now let's compare that to wine number two. Let's go ahead and grab wine number two. Alrighty, let's smell it. Way different. I mean, completely different. Wine number two for me, it's definitely a little more earthy, right? You know, it has this almost like kind of fresh tilled potting soil. It smells like, you know, you've been working in the garden, just really kind of turning that soil, really kind of working with your hands in the garden. Also, I get a ton of this almost like, I get a little bit of that vegetal component I was talking about. This is known as Purzines, which exist in a specific family of grape varieties, specifically the Cabernet family. This is that same, you know, smell. Oh, yeah, moss. I love that. Yeah, it's definitely got this almost like mossy kind of character to it as well. That's a really good tasting note, Kelly. But yeah, there's like almost like a bell pepper quality to this wine. Almost like think like cooked red bell peppers. I get a ton of that in this wine, and that's this chemical compound called pyrazine that exists actually in the skins of bell peppers. It also exists in that family of grapes I was telling you about, the Cabernet family. So think of New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc and that just like intense grapefruity, almost what some people would call cat pee smell. So that is actually that same chemical component, just taken up a notch. Sauvignon Blanc actually is in the same family of grapes as Cabernet Sauvignon, believe it or not. Yes, Kelly, bell peppers, definitely. Cabernet Sauvignon is actually the love child between two grapes, Sauvignon Blanc and Cab Franc. So that's a little kind of fun fact about it. But yeah, I mean, really, for me, this wine just smells much earthier. I am getting just a ton of, there's a little bit of fruit there, but it's almost this like underripe, almost fresh picked kind of fruit, as opposed to the, intense, ripe, almost dried fruit character of wine number one. It just is, yeah, it just smells so much earthier. And also another important thing to mention about wine number two, I don't get a ton of oak on that as well. So I don't think wine number two has been aged in oak at all, which is actually really, really unique for a red wine. And there's only a few styles of red wine that are never see any oak aging whatsoever. So it's another thing to kind of keep in mind. Famously, this is done in Beaujolais and in the Loire Valley for Cab Franc as well. It's not unusual to see producers eschew the use of oak whatsoever. So let's go ahead and jump on tasting these wines. Let's start with wine number one. Does anybody, before we kind of go into tasting, does anybody want to maybe throw out some guesses as to what they may be thinking the wines could be just by smell alone? We got any superstar tasters out there today? All right, yeah, no, it's okay. Let's go ahead and jump. I love just the kind of mystery of trying to figure out what these wines may be. All righty. Now, taste is really important to kind of distinguishing what's in your glass. This is where we're going to kind of figure out grape variety and place as well. So let's go ahead and taste wine number one. First thing we're tasting for in red wine can be tannin. Tannin is that chemical compound I was talking about earlier in the tasting, where tannin essentially, I associate tannin in red wine with dryness. So that drying sensation in your mouth, that's actually this chemical compound tannin that exists in the skins, seeds, and stems of grape varieties. And like I was saying before, thicker skin grape varieties tend to have a little more tannin in them than thinner skin grape varieties. But some other things that we're going to focus on when we're tasting is acid. So it's almost like the antithesis of tannin, if you want to think of it that way. Instead of like drying out your palate, it really refreshes it. Like high acid wines, think of like Riesling or Chenin Blanc from the Loire Valley. They just have this intense freshness on the palate. Pinot Noir and Gamay are a great example of high acid red wines that really just are quite fresh and perfect for a great summer evening, just sitting on the porch. I mean, they're just really, really refreshing and just want us to kind of keep drinking them. Whereas tannin, it's a little more structured, it's a little more intense, it's kind of fuller. The next thing we're going to look for is body, which is, I kind of like to describe body in wine kind of in terms of like milk. So light-bodied wine would be like skim milk. Medium-bodied would be like kind of like 2%, and then whole milk cream would be like a really full-bodied wine, that kind of textured, intense palate filling sensation. And then the final thing we're really going to taste for is structurally is alcohol. Wine number one, the main thing that jumps out for me is on the taste, on the structure, is alcohol. I mean, there's that burning sensation we got on the nose a little bit that Kelly was talking about. I'm really getting that right in the middle of my chest right now. So I think this wine may be kind of getting up there in terms of the alcohol level. Again, what that will indicate is this wine probably is coming from a really warm climate, somewhere that gets a lot of sunlight that allows these grapes to ripen fully. So somewhere maybe in the New World or in the Mediterranean. I also, on the palate, I'm confirming all that fruitiness I got on the nose as well. So again, there's like really intense ripe fruit characters, almost a little bit of raisinated character to me as well. If you're ever getting like dried fruits, this will always almost indicate that the wine has gone through a degree of aging as well. Like I get a little bit of fig on this wine on the palate. I also get almost like this kind of like dried, kind of almost like a raspberry preserve. It's really quite unique. This wine is super delicious. I get a little bit of licorice beans on there as well. It's I mean, this wine it's a big, intense, bold wine. I mean, I think it's really that structure there is kind of being backed by the alcohol. I mean, this wine is crazy. Does anyone want to chime in with some tasting notes on the wine? What do we think about wine number 1? Where do we think it may come from? It's delicious. Yeah, it definitely is delicious, Kelly. I almost want to just like drink this with like lamb chops. Like just it's really quite yummy. Yeah, it's powerful. It's not usually what I drink, but it's really kind of a nice departure from. I'm a big Pinot Noir guy, so this is a nice departure from the kind of like lighter, kind of more effervescent, kind of airy red wines that I like to drink. But it's quite good. Yeah, I definitely agree with you, Kelly. It's really delicious. Does anyone maybe want to take a guess as to what grape this may be, or maybe where it's coming from? Alrighty, yeah. I mean, let's just go ahead and move on to wine number 2. I mean, wine number 1 is so good. Let's compare wine number 2 to it. Alrighty. Alrighty, wine number 2. I mean, structurally, these wines are fairly similar. I would say this wine has about the same amount of tannin as wine number 1. I would say wine number 1, the tannin on that is like medium to maybe a medium plus. There is some tannin there, but it's not overly tannin. It's not like Cabernet Sauvignon. I'd agree with that on this wine, on wine number 2 as well. This wine, I mean, it has some dryness to it, but it's not immediately attacking the palate, and it's not sucking all that moisture out of my palate as well. So I would say this is about medium tannin. This one, it's a little fresher, so I would say this has a little higher acidity. So maybe this is coming from a cooler climate. Body-wise, I think this is a little lighter, just because of the alcohol. I think here is just a little less, a little more toned down. I mean, I'm not getting that intense burning sensation I was getting on wine number 1. And again, confirming all that earthiness that we got on the nose. I mean, this wine number 1 or wine number 2 compared to wine number 1, wine number 2 is a completely different wine. It's way more earthy. I'm getting, again, more of that kind of like, almost like potting soil, kind of like fresh turned earth character to this wine. I mean, the earth for me is a more of a kind of youthful earth, as opposed to something that's like a dried leaf or anything else. I'm also again getting that like really nice, savory kind of cooked red bell pepper on this as well. And then the fruit for me is this kind of bright cherry, almost like almost underripe sour cherry, but kind of a darker cherry as well. I mean, there's some savory character to this wine. I mean, the wines on the palate couldn't be any more different, I would say. I mean, wine number 2 is definitely more of an earthy, maybe old world style. I mean, this wine is, I mean, I love it. I mean, it's almost like just kind of like, it reminds me again, and I'm going to go back to this gardening kind of motif, because a little bit about me, I do like to garden a little bit, and I love that smell of like fresh potting soil. There's nothing better. Yeah, definitely peppery, Stephanie. There's nothing better than that like smell of like opening a fresh bag of potting soil. It's really quite lovely, and this wine kind of reminds me of that a little bit. And again, that nice kind of peppery quality to it as well. Again, also, this wine would be a really great summer wine as well, just a little lighter in alcohol and a little fresher. Yeah, I mean, it's quite good. Now let's go ahead and move on to the conclusion. let's go ahead. Let's go start trying to like piece together everything we're talking about today. So wine number one. I mean, just off the bat, I mean, we said this wine is quite fruity. I mean, there doesn't really seem there is a little earthiness. Yes, Kelly, need hints. Oh yeah, let's go over some hints. Yeah, wine number two, or wine number one. Yeah, I mean it's really fruity. It's really quite fruity. There's not a ton of earthiness to it. I mean, there's that kind of nice licorice quality to it, but I think this may be coming from more of a New World climate in terms of what it may be. Yeah, and wine number one is a little tricky. I will say that, Kelly. It's like blind tasting these wines can be a little tricky sometimes, but because it's like you go through your list of like what possible grape varieties it may be, and this one always seems to get overlooked. But yeah, let's kind of like break down what it may be. So when I am getting to the deduction part of my blind tasting, I like to go in a very kind of analytical fashion. So first, I like to kind of figure out where the wine is coming from. So we already stated, this wine, it seems to have a little warmness to it. It seems to have higher alcohol. It seems to be fruitier. That for me always indicates a New World wine. So a wine that's not from Europe. So deducing that, I mean, when we talk about the New World, we're talking about the U.S., New Zealand, Australia, South America. Yeah, absolutely. Like Chile, Argentina. I mean, for me, some really good grape varieties that this may be, because I mean, it's not like Pinot Noir. It's definitely not Pinot Noir, right? It's not got that lateness. I mean, Pinot Noir with this high alcohol would be really, really crazy. Also, it's not Cabernet because it doesn't have the structure. It doesn't have the color. Cabernet Sauvignon will also pretty much always have a little bit of that greenness that I was talking about a little bit in wine number two. There's a good hint for you. That Cabernet family does have some greenness to it. So maybe that's what's going on with wine number two. But I mean, wine number one definitely doesn't have that either. So yeah, and it's not something like Syrah either. But yeah, South America is a good guess as well. But for me, yeah, again, figuring out what those grapes are. There's only Malbec would be a good guess. Yeah, I mean, Malbec definitely has that kind of like rustic, kind of intense, full body quality to it, and also a fun grape variety that often gets overlooked and had quite a bad rep for a good bit of time. Zinfandel. American Zinfandel, very classic style of wine. Yeah, Malbec. Yeah, I don't think that's a bad guess whatsoever. Yeah, I mean Zinfandel, characteristically, characteristically Zinfandel, very intense, very high alcohol, kind of like Malbec. So I feel like maybe let's go on to wine number two. Another quick note to add about wine number one, it has this almost like leathery component to it as well that is really indicative of the grape variety. That leathery quality is what's known as a kind of phenolic character of the wine. So again, almost attributed to like these really intense high alcohol wines. Alrighty, wine number two. So yeah, I mean, pretty much the antithesis of wine number one. Doesn't have that fruitiness, much more earthy. Again, that peppery quality Stephanie and Kelly kept talking about. I mean, this wine has it in droves. So like I was saying before, there's one family of grapes that has this kind of pepper quality to it. And anytime you ever smell that, taste that, it's really going to be indicative of this family of grapes, and that's the Cabernet family. Yeah, I mean, so that would be Cabernet Sauvignon, Cab Franc for red wines, and Merlot. Also, a good note about the Cabernet family, the Malbec actually does have a little bit of greenness to it as well. It's actually part of that same family from Bordeaux. But in terms of what wine number 2 will be, let's talk about that structure. Remember how I said there's not a ton of tannins here? Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot as well will have a richness to it, that intense tannic presence. This wine, for me, doesn't really have that, and the tannins are almost like a kind of like a solid medium, but it does have one thing, and that's really, really fresh acidity. So it's got a higher acidity. So it's coming from a really, really cool climate. It could be a Cabernet Sauvignon blend from Bordeaux, or maybe it could be famously in the Loire Valley. They make Cab Franc out of. They make single variety Cab Franc, which Cab Franc is really known for this kind of peppery, savory quality, and so it tends to be a little bit lighter than Cabernet Sauvignon or Merlot even. Alrighty, before we reveal the wines, does anyone have a guess as to what grape varieties they may be, or where they may be coming from in the world of wine? Yeah, let's just go ahead and reveal. Number 2, Cab Franc. I like it, Stephanie. Yeah, I think that's a really good guess, for sure. Anyone else? How about wine number 1? Number 2, Cab Franc. Yeah, Kelly, I like it. Anyone want to guess what wine number 1 is? Alrighty, yeah, let's just go ahead and jump into what the wines are. Both awesome. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, Kelly, I also like the Malbec call too. Yeah, Aaron, thank you for joining the convo. I think both of these wines are really great. They're both really, really different, but I think they are so delicious and really great examples of what they are. But yeah, let's do the big reveal. So wine number 1. Definitely a tricky variety with vote on Malbec or Zin. Yeah, I agree. I think really getting to that Malbec and Zin call is it can be one of the hardest things. And this wine is incredibly hard to call in a blind tasting because personally, I'm always scared to call it because I've called this grape variety everything from Pinot Noir all the way like California Pinot Noir all the way to I've called it some crazy Gamay. I've called this grape variety Gamay before, if you can believe that. But yeah, wine number 1 again. I think the most telltale sign of this wine being what it is that incredibly high alcohol. This is California Zinfandel. This is the Easton Zin from Amador County. One of our favorites in the shop. Easton is actually the project here. I know the label's a little backwards for everybody on the stream, but this is coming from the Amador County in California. So Easton is one of the wine projects from a really fabulous. Yes, I love the good Zin too, Kelly. Is a fabulous wine project from really innovative, really influential California winemaker Bill Easton. He is part of this group of winemakers from California known as the Rhone Rangers. He kind of helped plant, establish, and cultivate Rhone varieties. So grape varieties typically found in the Rhone Valley in France, grape varieties like Syrah and Grenache. He helped establish those in California in the 80s. He established this winery about 18 years ago as a kind of ode to his father. His father always wanted him to make Zinfandel. And he found some really, really old vines in Amador County, which sits at the kind of base of the Sierra foothills in California, more in the central area of California, as opposed to out on the coast where like Sonoma and Napa are. We find some of the oldest vines in California in this area, and this is one of my favorites because of the price point as well. It's $19. It's got some age on it. I think that's what one of the trickier parts about this wine. It's got a little age on it. Age is the universal equalizer in terms of wine. This is 2014 vintage. $19 for aged Zinfandel, which is crazy. Crazy deal on this wine. And this wine is always priced very, very well. But yeah, it comes from 50 to 80-year-old vines planted in the foothills of the Sierra in Amador County. Yeah, fabulous wine for the price, and absolutely delicious, and a really good example of how good California Zin can be. Sometimes California Zin can be a little intense and a little in your face and ripe, but this has some structure to it. This has good acid. Also, it's got this intense fruit character that's not overwhelming like some Zinfandel can be. Some Zinfandel can just be like crazy ripe and just extremely high in alcohol. I mean, this is we talked about the alcohol in this wine, and this is 14.5%. So it's fairly high for a wine, but not as high as some Zinfandels can be. Also, I talked about kind of how this wine had a sort of fruit basket-y character to it. That's because Zinfandel, as a grape variety, actually ripens unevenly. The bunches, so grapes, when they grow, they kind of hang off in little bunches. Think about those bunches of grapes we get in the grocery store. Wine grapes are like that, but just a little more tightly packed. Zinfandel is unique in that it ripens unevenly throughout the bunch. So this is called differential ripening. This is kind of a fun little wine nerdy portion. But essentially, you'll get these really intense ripe berries, but you also get some really nice underripe berries as well. So this creates a kind of plethora of different fruit characters that you can get from the wine, and kind of gives Zinfandel that characteristic like tutti fruity quality to it. But yeah, this is an absolutely fabulous wine for the price. Alrighty, let's jump into wine number 2. So Stephanie and Kelly guessed Cab Franc. Where are we thinking? So Cab Franc, typically found in the Loire Valley in France. Are we thinking Loire Valley Cab Franc? Yeah. Anyone? Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Let's go with it. Yeah. Anyone else thinking maybe something else? Maybe like Bordeaux. Yes. Grenache. Yeah. That's actually a good guess, Aaron. Yeah. Grenache. Grenache comes from the south of France. It can sometimes be like this. Yeah, Bordeaux. Yeah, I like it, Stephanie. Grenache, typically a grape variety found in the south of France, and it's often blended with things like Syrah as well, especially in the Southern Rhone, and like those really good GSM Côte de Rhone blends. Definitely are quite delicious. However, I'm just going to go ahead and do the big reveal. And I agree, we do need more classes. And once things get back to normal, hopefully we can jump right back into the Somm School series, because there's nothing we love more than sharing the knowledge we have with all of y'all. And we really appreciate the support you've given us over the past few weeks as well. But yes, we definitely need some more classes. And we are working on doing some online classes as well through our Instagram channel. We actually do have up there right now a kind of short introduction to France video led by Sarah, and we just actually uploaded Intro to Italy as well. So while we wait for the store to kind of get back to the ability to host these really good classes, definitely keep up with our social media and tune in for those classes. Yeah, the Italy class Sarah just posted is super cool and really highlights some of the more fun it's a good mix of the kind of the classic and the often looked over regions in Italy. So definitely check that out. That's on our Instagram, on our IGTV channel. So we actually just posted one today, and that's the Italy class. But I think if you go back, you can actually look at the France Part 1 and Part 2 class. So, yep, that was just a little sidetrack. But yeah, let's go ahead and reveal the wine. So we said Bordeaux, we said Cab Franc. It is Cab Franc. So this is one of our favorite producers in the shop. This is Arnaud Lambert. I know the label is flipped backwards because of the computer camera, but this is one of our most favorite winemakers in the region of the Loire. Arnaud Lambert farms over 40 hectares of vines in the Saumur, Champagny, kind of Anjou area of France in the Loire Valley. This area, especially Saumur, Champagny, is really well known for Cab Franc. Also, he makes a fantastic Chenin Blanc that is to die for. It's very mineral driven. He has this really unique kind of style to making Chenin Blanc where he doesn't allow the wine to undergo a process called malolactic fermentation, which essentially makes the wine incredibly fresh and delicious and super drinkable. But yeah, he's really well known for his Cab Francs as well. This is from a vineyard site known as Terre Rouge, which actually means red earth. This is coming from the village of Saumur Champagny, in this little tiny town called Saint Cyr-en-Bourg, which his family is actually from. But again, the Cab Franc, kind of unlike Bordeaux, which Bordeaux is also a really good guess, and Grenache is a good guess as well. This has a little less structure than Bordeaux. Bordeaux would be bigger, more intense. We would also get a little more oak as well. This wine does not see any oak whatsoever. It's just aged in cement tanks, which kind of allows the grape variety to shine through this wine. Oak will sometimes kind of muddy the pool a little bit and really kind of, for lack of a better word, dilute the varietal character of the wine. But Cab Franc for me is the kind of fresher, less intense, everyday drinking kind of version of Cabernet Sauvignon. Again, another just key characteristic of Cab Franc is that peppery quality and that really nice kind of earthiness as well. And again, this is just incredibly fresh, super delicious, and also a complete bargain at $21. What's so unique about Arnaud Lambert's wines is that they're all sourced from single vineyard sites in these regions, which, I mean, for $21, if you were to buy something like this in, say, like California, I mean, it would be like 3 times the price. So this wine is super special. Again, also check out his Chenin Blanc as well. If you're a big Chenin fan, it's one of my favorites in the shop, and that one's also $21 as well, which is incredibly crazy. But now on to the most important question today. What was everybody's favorite grape or favorite wine today? Was it either the East End or was it the Cab Franc today? I know we had fans of both. Yeah, I mean, I love them both. Yeah, the Easton's intense and delicious. Yeah, like I said, this is a great food wine. I mean, oh my gosh, this just makes me want. Yeah, Easton seems to be the crowd favorite today. Yeah, I mean, like I said, great food wine. Lamb chops is like it immediately jumps to my mind. Also, a great steak wine as well, just because of that freshness. That structure, I mean, would just pair really well with steak. Also a great burger wine as well, because it's got some lightness to it as well. Yeah, awesome. Yeah, we definitely have some as well. So I will pass that along. Oh, what's the favorite at the party, Aaron? Is it a split party? 4 of us tasting. Oh wow! So it's an even split for Cab Franc and Easton. That's awesome. Yeah, I love this Cab Franc. It's so great. I mean, it's for me it's a little more of a kind of everyday drinker than the Easton Zen. Um, it's just so fresh, so delicious, so earthy. I would for the second wine, I would actually go more of a kind of pasta, just fresh pasta with tomato sauce. I really think that kind of peppery quality really goes well with tomato-based sauces. Also, it is another really good burger wine. It's I mean, definitely a little different style, but we have a couple of regulars who swear by it. We turn them on to this wine, and it's their favorite barbecue wine now. I mean, that smokiness pairs really, really well with that peppery quality as well. Also, I mean, great wine to drink like when it's really, really hot out. But I mean, this is one of my favorites as well. I mean, I hadn't tasted this wine in quite a few months before this class, and I mean, this is revisiting this made me really, really happy. I'm so happy where this wine is at right now, just because it's so freaking good for the price. But yeah. Also, I would also like to pair this with a little more a gamey dish. Maybe some like if we were able to get some good like rabbit or hare, it'd be really fun with that as well. Really traditional Loire Valley recipe right there. But yeah, I'm glad everybody liked these wines. We really appreciate y'all participating with us this week. Next week, I believe we are having another tasting with actually this time one of our one of our import partners, our good friend Phil from D Maison. Who imports mostly European wines, but he's our big chocolate guy. So it's a little kind of insider info for y'all. I think. Hey Sarah, that's go? That's yes. The Phil tasting. Yeah. So Phil, yeah. So stay tuned for our tasting with Phil from D Maison next week. That's going to be a really fun one. Phil is a great dude and knows a ton about wine and is. I mean, y'all have definitely probably had a few of his wines as well. The Statu Rosé that we've been, thank you, Stephanie. We really appreciate you coming out tonight and doing this tasting with us. But if y'all have had the Statu Rosé, that's one of Phil's wines. Also, the Mastoy line of Chocolinas is as well. So yeah, stay tuned for that info coming next week. But again, we appreciate y'all supporting us during this time. I know it's crazy, and we all just, we're all ready to kind of get back to our programming and definitely get some classes back in here, hopefully sooner rather than later. But again, your support definitely helps us keep the doors open during this crazy time. So. Thank you all so much for joining me tonight. I love doing this. I haven't done one of these in a very, very long time, so this is good to kind of get back in the swing of things and get back to kind of continuing our wine education programming here at the Exchange at Edmonds Oast. So again, tune in to our social media if you are missing some of our classes. There's online Instagram TV videos are up there. Please tune into those. They're fantastic. They're not like hours long. They're just quick, like 30 minutes, I think, a piece. So they're just perfect for all of us who are, cooped up during this crazy time. So again, thank you all so much for supporting. We will hopefully see y'all again fairly soon, and hopefully we'll see you next week for our fun tasting with Phil from D Maison. So thank you all so much, and y'all have a wonderful evening.